Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Promptly Speaking, an IBPAP official podcast where we bring you the movers and shakers of our industry and their journey to success. Today's guest is Joel Consing, President and CEO of Maharlika Investment Corporation. Joe, thanks for taking time out to drop by IBPAP for this session. I know you arrived from New York early this morning, so hope the jet lag is not bothering you too much.
It's all good. Well, no, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
A lot of people know who you are, but I'm sure some of our listeners will be interested to know your beginnings, especially before you embarked on your journey. Where did you grow up, Joel, and how were you as a student?
Well, I was born, raised, and bred in the Philippines. So I went to LaSalle. Wasn't really a great student until my last few years in college, when I realized that I needed to straighten up, which I did eventually. And it was interesting. My first break, actually, because what I used to do was in my last 2 years, I used to work and study at the same time. I was a research assistant to the VP for External Relations at De La Salle University. His name is Dr. Benito Villacorta. So I would work there Wednesdays and Thursdays, and every time there would be a basketball game, we would print shirts. My girlfriend and I, now my wife, we would print shirts, and we would sell that during basketball games. And during summer, I would then try to sell encyclopedia, which I did, about 7 of them. And one of those to whom I was trying to sell was a company called Multinational Bank Corporation, which is a local investment bank. And interestingly, they said, well, we won't be buying any books from you, but we'd like for you to apply here, which I did. And so I worked with them beginning June 1st of 1989. I would never forget that, walking at 8:15 p.m. in their office in Ayala Avenue. And I would study at night and do my thesis in the evening.
Wow, a working student, encyclopedia salesman. I learned something new already. But looking at your journey, Joel, you've been on 100% finance track.
Correct.
You were a banker, and then quite a good stint at ICTSI, which we'll talk about later. And now Maharlika. Can you just walk us through that journey?
Sure.
So you connect the dots.
So just following the same path, I joined Treasury Department at MIB. And it was interesting because I must have moved about 4 or 5 times before I really settled first in Bankers Trust, HSBC, and finally in ICTSI. And it was really about trying to learn different aspects of not commercial banking, but rather credit and investment banking and global markets, what really interested me most. And therefore, every institution that I joined, it was always a different specialty. And I think all that culminated, and I keep saying this because I said that when I was at Bankers Trust, it was a culmination of everything that I learned from MIB et al. And when I went to HSBC, I felt a culmination of everything that I learned in banking prior to that. And finally, having gone to ICTSI, I felt that everything which I learned in banking was now applicable in ICTSI, and at Maharlika, everything just really is being rolled up. So I felt, I'm really grateful for that experience. But equally interesting was not knowing exactly what I wanted, but only the desire to learn. Just like what Steve Jobs said in his speech, in his commencement speech in Stanford in 2015. He said, when you look back and when you connect the dots, that's when you realize that you're able to make use of all these learnings to propel you to your next stage. And this is exactly what I'm doing in Maharlika.
You connect the dots backward and it all
Correct.
Makes sense.
Correct.
Let's talk about your stint at ICTSI. I mean,
Sure.
one of the most successful Philippine conglomerates that has gone international. Of course, led by the legendary Ricky Razon.
Yes.
How was working with Mr. Razon like?
exhilarating. I would say very challenging. The thing about Mr. Razon is being a very wealthy person. He was also a very large private investor. When I say private investor, I'm talking about investing in financial products and international financial markets. So therefore, a CFO and treasurer, the ideas which we were generating was probably something that he was already buying in the international markets. So therefore, when we were delivering new ideas to him, he was very open about it because he's seen it before, or he's seen a version of it, and he's seen how these versions have worked in their respective markets. I made a career out of building and building what they call a shareholder accretive capital structure, and a very big portion of that was making use of hybrid capital productively and in a manner that creates significant shareholder value. And when I first brought the idea of doing a hybrid capital in 2011, we had just done our maiden 10-year deal, our 10-year plain vanilla bond, which prior to ICTSI having done it, PLDT was the one who did it last about 11 years prior. So there was really no new issuer nor new 10-year issuer out there. So we did it, and it was successful. And when I brought to him the idea of hybrid capital, it's never been done before. So
Wow.
that was very new to him. I brought it to our comptroller then. He said, it works accounting-wise. Yes, it does work. I brought it to the CFO then, Martin O'Neill. He said, very interesting. And his question was, who's going to buy it? And then third, when I brought it to Mr. Razon, he said, I love it. Let's do it. So that entire process of having to go to the SEC's general accountant, explaining to them the accounting entries involved, what the impact is et al., and then taking it to market, and having been made successful, it went through a different evolution, which in turn other companies locally have used as their own templates to build their own balance sheet. So you have Petron doing it, Ayala doing it, and so on and so forth. And it became a staple.
Fascinating. So your proposal, you had to convince Ricky Razon, which I'm guessing was no small feat. I mean, given what we've heard, but you created something new that is now templated by other conglomerates.
Correct. And it formed part of a very large portion of ICTSI's capital structure. And the reason why it just accreted so much value was it was only through a hybrid capital issue that one could actually redeem shares at par. And during a time when there was a change in accounting rules that defined what debt and equity is, that might be different from the original instrument when it was issued. I mean, it's a bit technical, but
That's the hybrid part.
that's the hybrid part, correct? Yeah, and I think that really made my career for over the past 16 years.
So let me ask you, such a great job at ICTSI, which I can tell you were just, well, maybe consumed is too strong a word, but certainly you the word you used was accelerating, right?
Yes.
And then now Maharlika. Why did you do that, Joel?
There was an intermediate step, which was the OPEA.
I remember.
Yes. So having left, so the question is, why jump from ICTSI to the public sector? Well, two reasons. I felt that it was time for me to give back. The country has been very good to us, our family. And I felt that this is one way by which I could give back, i.e. making use of my talents to create value for the country. And second was I felt it's the perfect timing. I don't see myself, or pardon me, maybe stating it differently. I'm not sure that I would be able to add as much value during the prior administration, and I don't know who the next administration is. So I felt that doing it during the time of President Marcos, was the best time to do it. So I took the lead.
That's clear. Was this something that you raised your hand for, or
I applied
did
for the job.
FDG approach you?
No,
How
I
did it
applied
work?
for the job. As a matter of fact, so it was interesting. So let's talk about that intermediate step. So when I joined OPEA, so first of all, what is OPEA? So OPEA stands for Office of the Presidential Advisor for Investment and Economic Affairs, and what it is a concept that was taken in 2001 from Tony Blair.
Right.
And in 2001, Tony Blair created the Prime Minister, the UK PM's delivery unit, wherein all his campaign promises, he removed it from the bureaucracy and placed it under a president or a prime minister's delivery unit. And this concept was very successful in the UK, first and foremost. In fact, Tony Blair Foundation espouses this to every government that they go to. And from the time from the UK, it's been applied in many African countries, and in the US, in Pakistan, and in Asia. There were two very successful applications of this during the in Malaysia. It was applied in Malaysia, and then also in Indonesia. So when it was put together in the Philippines, it was only meant to do two things: bring in investments, A, and B was to provide advice or provide consult on matters that involved the economy. And that was excellent because from being a banker and being a finance person, and I love research, by the way, and when I got to OPEA, it allowed me to really open up my experience into many things other than finance. So I think I wrote about 4 or 5 papers when I was in OPEA, some of which reached the president, some of which did not, but they were impactful. And when the opportunity in Maharlika arose, when they posted the invitation to apply through a portal, I raised my hand and I said, I like that. So I applied for the role. Honestly, I've actually wanted to be the CEO of Maharlika, even going back to the debates in 2022.
Oh, okay. So it's something that's been on your mind.
Correct.
And radar.
Correct. I felt that I had experience and I had basically the right, I would say, frame of mind, and it was the right time for me to jump into the public sector.
Another example of connecting the dots
Indeed.
backwards.
Indeed.
So quite a contrast. We have Ricky Razon, then Secretary FDG. Anything you want to talk about with
No, it was interesting because the intermediate step of OPEA was a hybrid. It was hybrid in a sense that I was working in the public sector. Our office was in Malacanang, right behind the office of President Marcos, literally about 52 steps away on the same floor. But at the same time, we were in the private sector because I was not employed by the office of the president. I was employed by Secretary Go. And that therefore allowed me to really delve into many aspects which I felt was, I would say, offered opportunities for efficiency and offered opportunities for us to really bring in investments to the Philippines. And Secretary Go, also having who was still at the private sector at the time, albeit he was an advisor to the president, actually brought in private sector practices to what we were doing, and that to me was very helpful also in my learning curve.
Joel, you've mentioned that part of MIF's investment strategy is on digital connectivity.
Yes.
Now, considering that the IT BPM industry is a pillar of the Philippines economy, how do you envision where we are as an industry as part of the
Sounds good.
infrastructure initiative?
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll give you context, and following the context, I will go to your answer. Yeah, I'll go to your question. So first of all, what we've done is we've basically identified what we felt were potential intergenerational drivers going towards 2040. The NEDA has got a program which is called Ambition 2040, and those and the Ambition 2040 is in turn divided into Philippine development plans divided into 5 years. So what we've done is we've basically aligned with those objectives. And in so doing, we've identified a number of intergenerational drivers. And those three particularly are energy security, digital connectivity, and food security. So let's talk about digital connectivity particularly. So the idea basically is for us to build telecom infrastructure in the rural areas. So we won't anymore touch obviously the urban areas. The tower companies can do that. So what we will do is we will support rural infrastructure or rural telecommunications. By so doing, we basically are supporting 4 industries as a result. First is agriculture. So by providing digital connectivity, hopefully agricultural companies will now be able to make use of IoTs to be able to increase their yield, increase their productivity. By the way, one of the basic differences between MIF or MIC and other sovereign wealth funds are MIF for the next 5 years will be acting like a national development fund, wherein the investments will be undertaken here. And if there's any investment that will be taken offshore, it will have a direct impact onshore, except that the vehicle is setting offshore. So hence, it'll all be invested here for the next 5 years. Second is, apart from it being domestic focused, it is also collaborative in nature. Meaning a sovereign wealth fund today, the likes of which are, let's say, the Norwegian Pension Fund and Temasek et al., when they make an investment, those are usually standalone.
Right.
Here, it requires a little bit of collaboration in order for it to achieve its maximum impact. And third, it is, highly impactful domestically. Now, in the case of digital infrastructure, going back to your question, we would need the assistance of the NGOs and the DA to be able to upskill basically the farming companies or the agricultural companies and the farmers themselves so that they can make use of the technology. Because providing the technology itself does not automatically increase their yield. So that's one. Second industry would be the educational sector. There is a very strong digital divide between rural education and urban education in terms of its delivery. And we feel that by providing digital infrastructure, hopefully we can retain more teachers in the rural areas and raise the quality in the delivery of both information and quality of education to the rural sector. Third is healthcare. Today, if you look at the doctor per population ratio in the Philippines, the United Nations recommends 1:1,000. One doctor is 1,000 people. In the Philippines, we're 1:26,000. That is the impact in the barrios. So what we want to be able to do is by providing digital infrastructure, hopefully we can have some members of the IBPAP and other startups perhaps to start providing telehealth care services in order to be able to multiply geometrically the capacity of a single doctor to be able to serve more difficult cases and more people without actually expanding the number of people involved. So, telehealthcare. And finally would be, we want to be able to assist the rural entrepreneur in reaching a wider market beyond what the middleman can actually provide them. So these are the 4 areas that we think we can impact if we provide digital infrastructure.
That's clear. You've talked about, the importance of rural development. For our industry, expansion outside Metro Manila has been one of the key drivers that started during COVID. In fact, 54% of our growth in the next 5 years will be outside Manila. So the role of countryside is also very important for us. I know you're a fan of countryside development
Absolutely.
as well. Can you talk us through your vision for the potential of these emerging cities and provinces?
Absolutely. First, let's talk about macro, and I'll take you to the micro. Let's talk about macro first. GDP is where we want to start. GDP today is basically composed of those four components. Let's start with C. So C, or your personal expenditure, comprises about 74 to 75% of your GDP. Then government spending is about 25 to 26%. Then you've got negative net exports. Then you've got your I, or your capital formation. That's less than 4% of your GDP. So the role, therefore, of Maharlika is to be able to enable capital formation. And anything that occurs directly has a direct impact on your GDP. So that's one way of looking at it. Now let's go one step lower. If you look at the Philippine population today, roughly about 53% of the population lives in the rural areas. And therefore, enabling the growth in the rural areas in terms of spending will have a direct impact now on the personal consumption that impacts your GDP, and it also raises your GDP per capita over time. Okay? Now, what will enable rural growth? So I talked about digital connectivity, but first and foremost, it's actually energy. Okay, so the Department of Energy came up with a study entitled "Benefits of Electrification." And what it resulted to, very interesting statistics. What it basically concluded was, if you give a poor family electricity from 0 hours to 8 hours, there is a potential increase in income and expenditure of about 15%, 15.8%, and 14% respectively. Mm-hmm. If you increase that from 8 to 16 hours, it rises to 33 and 32% respectively. 35 and 34% respectively. And if you increase it from 16 to 24 hours, it rises by 55 and 57% respectively. Wow. So by providing them with electricity, it also again goes back to the fact that you increase that income, you increase that expenditure, and it again impacts your GDP.
What percentage of the population doesn't have?
What, 5.5%?
5?
Yeah. So if you look at the electrification rate across the Philippines, about 97% would be what you find in Luzon, about 96, 95% in Visayas. Mindanao goes up to about 78%. So there's so much opportunity in the electricity sector. And that basically totals about 5.5% of your entire population. Now, the reality is that many of these are what you call in missionary areas. Right. Fine, we totally understand that. But therein also rests the opportunity for them to really grow is by providing them electricity. So what we are therefore doing is, apart from digital connectivity, I talked about first and foremost energy security. That's what we're now doing. So about 2 weeks ago, you may have read that we signed an agreement with Mindoro. And what we're going to be doing in Mindoro is to basically help fix the lines so that Mindoro can have 24. See, there are three things that are important for you and me when it comes to electricity. Price. Yeah. Today, roughly about 70% of the electricity that's being provided in Mindoro being a SPUG. SPUG stands for Small Power Utility Group. They're the ones who are not connected to the grid.
Correct.
About 74% of their electricity is coming from bunker and diesel. That's why the cost in Mindoro Occidental, I think, is roughly about 20 pesos per kilowatt hour. You cross about 10 kilometers, it comes down to 14.33 pesos per kilowatt hour. Really expensive. And yet, prior to the loop being finished, they only had 4 hours of electricity. Wow. So not only are you paying the most expensive, you're also paying for the most unreliable form of electricity.
Wow.
Right? And we aim to change that. And then the question is, why Mindoro? Why choose that particular area? If you look at Mindoro, the World Bank came up with a study that identified 5 wind superhighways for wind power. See, if you step back, the government has got an aim to increase the contribution of renewable power to total generated capacity to about 35% by 2030 and 50% by 2040. You can't build in megawatts if that's your aim. You need to build in gigawatts. And you can't build gigawatts, I mean, you can, in solar power because it'll make use of so much land and so much land unless you're building it in floating. So therefore, what you want to do is to build it in wind.
Right.
And they identified 5 wind superhighways, and Mindoro has got basically 2 of those. In Mindoro Oriental and Occidental are 2 out of the 5.
I see. Interesting.
And super interesting. And finally, Mindoro also plays a very special role in the international electricity market, because once NGCP connects Batangas to Mindoro and Mindoro to Mindanao, then you would have completed the loop. So Mindoro plays therefore a very important and critical role.
Joel, in a recent article on the Philippines in The Economist,
Yeah.
they cited 3 pillars of the economy. One is, our overseas remittances by the 10 million plus workers that we have abroad. Second is the IT BPM industry with our 1.7 million workforce generating almost the same level as overseas remittances. But then the third pillar, which is still gaining some momentum, is the potential of tourism. What are your thoughts on, Maharlika's role in boosting tourism? Because I hear of Thailand having 40 million tourists a year.
Yeah.
And we have
6.8
million?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. As a matter of fact, I met with the Secretary of Tourism just about 3-4 weeks ago, and we talked about exactly this: how Maharlika can play a role in developing in helping to expand the tourism sector. Before that, as a background, so tourism, if I remember correctly, contributed roughly about $3.68 billion in earnings. Currently, also employs roughly about 5 million people. So very important to the economy, and it's got an immediate impact towards reducing poverty. So it's that important. Now, it begs the question, therefore, in terms of what is it that the economy needs or the country needs in order for us to be able to achieve the same level of, I would say, tourist attraction that Thailand would have. And we've identified a number of them. So, Maharlika, if you step back, what you want to do is to build in infrastructure. So, and I don't mean just roads, but although that is very important. So what we've done is we've identified what are these, what infrastructure requirements that are needed in order to be able to invite more tourists in the country. So this is interesting. What I did was I calculated the road network infrastructure per capita per 1 million people in ASEAN. Why? Because road network infrastructure has got the highest multiplier when it comes to logistics cost, tourism delivery, and agriculture. Very interestingly, to your point, Thailand has got 10,080 kilometers per 1 million people. And out of the 12, you know where we are? 1,900.
10%.
So I get it. Okay, I get it that it's easier to build roads in a contiguous landmass than building bridges because we are in an archipelago, but not at that 80% discount, right? Because if you were to use as an excuse, then you must look at Indonesia. Indonesia has got close to 4,000 kilometers per 1 million people. But when calculating that ratio, you have to remember that the denominator in Indonesia is 274 million or 117. So those roads are actually twice longer.
Yes.
Right?
So there's double us.
Notionally speaking. So it tells you, therefore, that the opportunities, and that's how Thailand can accommodate 40 million people. 40 million tourists. Okay. The other one would be regional airports converting them to international airports. So we're also very interested in that. That's why we've also identified aviation and aerospace as one of those sectors we're quite keen in terms of investing. So those two particular areas are where we think we can add value.
These are all very relevant for the IT BPM industry,
It's great to
Joel.
hear.
As you know, the daily commute from homes to offices is the biggest pain point for our workers, which is why in the future of work, it's very important to have remote work flexibility.
Yeah.
Primarily because of these long commute times in Manila. So what you talked about, roads, airports, these are all factors that our investors and locators look at. So thank you for sharing that and what Maharlika's role is. Let's take a step back, Joel, because from what you've described, you have an extremely demanding schedule. How do you, integrate that schedule into some kind of work-life balance? What do you
Work-life
do?
balance. Yes. So a topic very well covered by many an international analysts when it comes to productivity. So if you read Robert Greene's Mastery, he espoused something different. Instead of work-life balance, he talked about work-life harmony. And that's how I've been able to do it, i.e., by integrating basically my work with my life in a way that's productive both in terms of my relationship with my family, my relationship with our employees, and my life in general relative to what I do. So that's the best way of perhaps explaining that. Because once you put a work-life balance, then for that to balance, and you have to ascribe a value to it. Or else if you create a harmony, it's just like playing music.
It's more integration than coming up with an either or.
Correct.
Zero-sum game kind of thing. No? So I learned that from another book, actually, Radical Candor. So very, very much related to what you're saying. So that's fascinating. I'm going to ask you some questions that may be a little bit surprising, Joel. I don't want you to think too much about it, and just say the first thing that comes into your mind when you hear these.
Sounds good.
These quick questions. What is your mantra in life?
Steel is forged to the crucible of fire.
How do you even remember that?
Because I was the one who said
Nice.
it.
Wow. Favorite book?
Quite a number, but if I were to choose one, I would say the most number of times I read was Mastery.
Okay, I'm gonna look for that.
Mastery, so Robert Greene.
Morning workout or night parties?
Morning workout.
Of course. What song do you sing in the shower?
Gosh, no, you got me there. You see, my voice is so bad, I can't sing, not even in the shower.
Guilty pleasure.
Coca-Cola.
That's it.
Yes.
Okay. When work is done, where do you go?
Home.
What is the one thing you cannot live without?
Challenges.
Greatest life skill that you are proud of?
Navigating complexity.
What is the most important advice you give to your kids?
Steel is forged to the crucible of fire.
And lastly, when you talk to the president, what advice do you get from him?
Be patient. And this is in relation basically to some situations which have I've brought to his attention, and his views were very consistent. I.e., be patient.
Thank you for that, Joel.
Thank you.
As we wrap up our session today, I there's still a couple of questions that I haven't quite covered. You talked about the importance of education and skills, which happen to be the biggest challenge of the IT BPM industry. I like to say, when I'm interviewed about this, that the Philippines doesn't have a demand problem for IT BPM. What we actually have is the challenge of talent supply. We have the demographics, youngest country in Asia, but finding the employable talent to fill that demand has become quite a challenge. So I'm just thinking out loud and maybe bringing this up with you. What role do you see Maharlika playing in helping what is an indispensable pillar of our economy?
Not necessarily what Maharlika can do, but rather perhaps what we in government can do in order to be able to support that. If you look at the role of EDBI or EDB in Singapore, apart from it being a policy-making body in terms of the direction of Singapore, economic future of Singapore, what they've done is they've also provided ancillary support by upskilling basically the employees and or upskilling potential employees and making sure that by the time that they're done with their training or an intermediate training right after school, that they become ready for the workforce. And I think that's probably where we have a gap, because I'm not sure that we are generating, I would say, immediately employable graduates, unless you're coming from perhaps some more I would say expensive schools. That's the reality, and I think that's probably where we lack, is provided intermediate support. Yes, I understand that there is a TESDA that's there, but perhaps TESDA is inadequate. Not by their own fault, but just because of their own, I would say, their own limitations in terms of their budget and what their mandate is. And I think that's probably where the opportunities lie. Now, what can Maharlika do? So in our case, we are looking at, we are in fact speaking to potential partners for putting up specific schools for a specific industry. And I think that's probably how we can assist, or how we can perhaps play a role in that development, because we must have also, we need to have commercial returns. So we have a twin mandate: commercial returns, and at the same time supporting the government's socio-economic development goals. And education is partly a socio-economic development goal. So hence, in order for us to be able to achieve some level of commercial returns, we need to be very specific in terms of industries where we can provide educational support. And we have to be very choosy in terms of what we get into. And that's how we can perhaps participate.
Would love to discuss with you, offline, possibly an IT BPM university concept moving forward. Last question.
Sure.
What advice would you give aspiring Filipino entrepreneurs looking to secure funding and support for their ventures?
So, when you look at a startup, where I think they need support is in the Death Valley. Okay, so if you look at their evolution, the Death Valley occurs within, I would say, after about a year of being started up, over a period of about 3 to 5 years. Therein lies, in my opinion, the need for perhaps government to be able to step in and intervene, because I believe that with the amount of creativity and talent in the Philippines, we only have one unicorn or two unicorns, perhaps, and I believe that much like in Indonesia and much like in Singapore, we can certainly develop more. Number two also is, if you look at the startup, I would say the startup ecosystem, most of the funders that you find here, many of them are conglomerate banks. Yes. Or families that own conglomerates. And eventually, I think the biggest fear is that they may one day subsidiarize it. And in my opinion, I think we need probably a little bit more maturity in terms of the way they look at their investment. And I think Well, eventually we will get there, but I think government also should play a big role in terms of supporting that startup market, particularly again during Death Valley.
Well, that was a very illuminating conversation, Joel. Thank you again for sharing your vast experience in the world of finance and all your stories as well, and most of all for your valuable time in joining me for this conversation. I'm sure our listeners learned a lot as I did. So thanks again, Joel, and good luck on your continuing journey in overseeing Maharlika.
No, thanks for this, Jack. I love this, and hopefully this will be the first of many.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Promptly Speaking. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.
That's information technology and business process management. We are coders and programmers, agile animators, illustrators, auditors, analysts, from consultants to managers, nurturing nurses and doctors, data developers and testers, VA smiling CXRs and artificial intelligence engineers. Oh, wait, there's more. We are problem solvers and number crunchers. We speak in several languages, including Java, Python, Python, and so on. And on and on and on. We create heroes and villains. We gain experience and level up in life.
We are the IT BPM industry, working with the Philippines. Join us.